Hello and welcome to OEG Voices.
OEG Voices.
OEG Voices.
OEG Voices.
A podcast bringing you the voices and ideas of open educators from around the world.
OEG Voices is produced by Open Education Global,
A member-based nonprofit organization
supporting the development and use of open education globally.
Learn more about us at oeglobal.org.
There's much to take in at a global level.
We hope to bring you closer to how open education is working
By hearing the stories of practitioners
told in their own voices.
Each episode introduces you to a global open educator.
And we invite you to later engage in a conversation with them
In our OEG Connect community.
Hello and welcome to OEG Voices. This is the podcast that we produce here at Open Education Global. And each time we do one of these, we bring you people, personalities, and ideas of open educators from around the world. I'm your host today, Alan Levine, and today is really a treat to have in the studio some colleagues from MIT Open Learning. And I don't think I have to spell out what the acronym stands for because I think everybody knows MIT. But we recently posted a short story noting the important connection between OE Global and MIT, and we kind of referred to them as Member Zero because that's where this organization started. So we thought it was really high time to go back and talk to people at the institution. That was a catalyst for us. So I'm pleased to have here in the studio first my colleague Una Daly, who has connections with MIT. Hi, Una.
Hello, Alan. Nice to be here.
Great. And we have our member rep from MIT, Curt Newton, who's the director of OpenCourseWare. And we also have Sarah Hansen, who's the senior manager at MIT Courseware. And we also have Curt Capizzola, who's a senior associate dean for digital learning. And we're just really looking forward to having a free-flowing conversation about, what's like state of the art and what's happening now at MIT. And there's so much to cover. So I first want to give a chance for everybody to say hello and tell us a little bit about your work and maybe how long you've been at MIT. So I'm going to point first at Curt because he's the guy who set this up. And hello and welcome, Curt.
Thank you, Alan. I'm director of OpenCourseWare. I've been with this program for over 19 years, and it kind of blows my mind to say that, how long it's been. It has gone by so quickly. I joined OCW just a couple of years after it had officially launched. So some things had been figured out at that point, but a lot of things were still emerging. And I've been in the director position for about 4 years now, I think.
Fantastic. And we kind of want to hear about the early days if we can. But first, we'll say hello to Sarah Hansen, who works for you at MIT Courseware. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Sarah Hansen. I'm the senior manager for the Educator Initiative, and I help lead strategic initiatives at OpenCourseWare. And I say that I have the best job at OpenCourseWare because I get to meet with faculty from all over MIT to talk about teaching. When a faculty member publishes open educational resources on our platform, sometimes they also share how they teach with those materials before they've published them. And I get to interview them about that. It's really wonderful. And more recently, I've been helping to lead with Curt and Chris, developing relationships with other educators out in the open ecosystem to figure out how we can collaborate to push everyone's work forward.
That's fantastic because I kind of want to get to talking later about how these courses actually come to be. And so how the courses are made, the cookie metaphor, and also to talk about those possible connections. But first, we'll give Chris a chance to say hello and tell us maybe a little bit about how'd you end up at MIT, Chris?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks to Alan and Una for inviting us to be part of this conversation. I'm Curt Capizzola, and I've been at MIT for about 20 years. I'm a professor of history. And before you ask, yes, you can major in history at MIT. And I've been teaching American history to students for a long time here, and also working along the way with different facets of open learning. But just this past summer, I joined Open Learning as the senior associate dean. And so I would say, I think Sarah's wrong. I have the best job at OpenCourseWare, because my job is to just sort of, be the interface between the amazing staff who sort of develop the courses, publish them, polish them, share them with the world in these sort of open ways that are so important to us. And I'm the interface between that and our MIT faculty, the ones who are in the classroom every day, kind of innovating, sort of coming up with new stuff. And, 6 days of the week, that's a pure joy. And the 7th day of the week, we get to, roll up our sleeves and make sure that interface is smooth.
Wow. Well, first of all, like we already know that you all love your work there at MIT. This is like Alan's question. You hear MIT, and it's like got such a great reputation, but what's it like there on an everyday basis? What's like something maybe the world doesn't know about the inner environment there on campus?
Did I jump in? So I do not come from a STEM background. And when I hear MIT, I think STEM, and thank goodness we have Chris telling us we can major in history at MIT, but I didn't know that before coming. And since being here, math, science, the humanities, it's contagious here. I don't know how to describe it, but you walk down the halls and you're just inspired by the work everybody's doing. And this really funny thing happens. You start to feel like you can do those things too. Like, if I just have access to the right materials, I could learn this stuff. It's nothing I've ever experienced anywhere else. It's completely inspirational. And I think through our work, that's what we're trying to share through OCW and other projects, is that feeling of you can do this. If you have the right materials, you can learn and do anything. And so I think that's something that maybe people don't realize until they come to MIT, that this energy is real.
Love that, Sarah. And I know that, we really discovered that in Open when the Open MOOCs came out, gosh, over a decade ago now. And we had learners around the world who had access to these materials from MIT and other universities and so forth. And we're just soaking it up. So yeah, wonderful to hear that.
Yeah, I love how you described that, Sarah. I would add that the student body is amazing, right? And so much of what we're sharing with the world, is coming from that energy. The diversity of the student body. I mean, it's still a STEM dominated institution in a lot of ways, but half of the student body is women drawn from all over the world. They have such broad interests. Yes, a huge number of them are majoring in some way in something to do with computer science, but also, like a majority of people play musical instruments and are, the humanities and arts programs and the curriculum that goes on in that aspect of the community is also really rich. And so OCW being a reflection of the complete MIT curriculum, it's really important to us to channel the breadth of things that are going on there too.
I was going to say a version of this is I like to tell people, sort of why our mascot is the beaver. So Tim the beaver, which is MIT spelled backward, right? Tim is our mascot. And beaver is, first of all, it's the engineering animal. It's always out there sort of building and experimenting and doing new things. But it's also, beavers are nocturnal, which MIT very much is as well. Probably every college is to some extent, but, we actually have the data to back this up because we know from usage of OpenCourseWare and our learning module system, we know that the students are on there at 4:00 in the morning, sort of doing their thing. And so, that's why it's Tim the Beaver.
That's wonderful. And, it's interesting to hear that your student population has diversified so much. And I know you have a really large global student population as well. And what are your percentages on that these days? I know, there was a little bit of a decline in recent years because we had some issues with, the pandemic. Or are you kind of running on percentages with international versus, I guess, domestic students?
This is in terms of enrolled students.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Chris, do you know, are you up on that?
So on campus, our undergraduate population is about 4,000 students, and they are mostly from the United States. About 15% are international students. Of course, we are sort of unlike some of our peers. We really have a really substantial number of first generation students and people whose parents are immigrants from really around the world. So, so that 15% number, actually, a culture a little bit higher than that. Our graduate population, which is about 6,000 students. And notice that all adds up to about 10,000, which is not that big compared to a lot of big research universities. But of our 6,000 graduate students, the majority are from outside the United States. I think we would be hard pressed to name a country that is not represented in our graduate student population. And of course, it has ebbed and flowed in the last couple of years, for some, obvious reasons, but those numbers are really pretty solid.
Yeah, if I can just add, from an OCW perspective, something like 70% of the traffic to our website comes from outside North America. So that, global connection is borne out in the way that the world is coming to these resources as well.
Let's do some time travel. The birth of OCW, Curt, you joined a little bit after, and Chris was probably on campus when this emerged. What was that like? And then maybe talk about like how that's expanded or changed or what it looks like now.
Yeah, thanks. So I joined as what was called a department. These were staff that were somewhat embedded in different departments. They had one foot firmly in the OCW organization, but they also had different sorts of relationships with departments. So for instance, there were department liaisons like myself who had recently graduated from, say, the architecture department. They were deeply known with what was going on there. And so a lot of what was going on in those first few years really was trying to realize this audacious experiment, in reality, figure out what it was actually going to look like. And so it was a lot of, in a sense, kind of trust building with the faculty. Faculty participation is voluntary. It always has been in OCW, but it had emphatic backing from senior leadership. We put a lot of attention in the first couple of years on, really working with like the right sort of early adopters who could have, we could shake things out and have good like peer influence. So in the first couple of years I joined, I spent a lot of time out talking with faculty who had maybe not tried this out yet. They'd heard a little about it. They had questions. They were interested. What does it mean to share my stuff like this really out in the world? Working through their questions, their concerns. Sometimes we needed to come back to them again and again and again. So we did that with patience and understanding. And that was really a wonderful part of the job, to be honest. The motivations that MIT faculty have in their teaching, they really do want to have the maximum impact out in the world. They're also super busy with their students and their research. And so a lot of the things that we did in those first few years were making sure that we placed a minimum burden on the faculty. Our team is going to do a lot of the logistical heavy lifting, right? What you've done in the course of teaching the class and creating those materials, just give us permission, hand them to us, be willing to have little interaction as we're going through, ask a few questions, be willing, hopefully, to like review the draft of what we've put together, and we're good to go. Hopefully not more than a few hours spread out over a handful of months, and the rest of the work is done by our team. We could only have this sort of team because we were fortunate to have, the backing of a couple of big foundations, the Hewlett and Mellon Foundation that provided the seed funding to like really ramp this thing up. And there was a commitment to get to a spot in a few years that would, basically reflect the whole MIT curriculum. But it was really a sprint in those first few years. And so there was a startup atmosphere, there were late nights, there were big crunches, pushing the envelope and breaking the envelope of some of the technology, there were those, the last week of a true production cycle, the content management system, you click a button, you just didn't know what was going to happen. Things are much better now. Things are more, sustainable. But that's kind of what the early years were like. And, coming out of that initial energy, once the plane was off the ground and we'd moved from like Post-it notes on a wall to some database and other tools, we're also able to start putting some energy into kind of the second part of the mission beyond sharing the MIT curriculum, which is helping launch this global movement. And so beginning to invest in what became the OCW consortium, a few more steps into what we now have as OE Global. So I was not directly involved in the launch of that, but was thrilled to be able to observe that taking shape. So that's one slice through what those first few years were like.
I wonder, Curt, if you or someone else wants to address external during that time period said that MIT was crazy, that you should be monetizing this. And here you were giving it away for free. What were you thinking?
Yeah, exactly. What's really in it? What's really going on?
Yeah,
it really is as simple as the pitch, or we're going to give this stuff away because it's in our mission as an institution to advance knowledge. We think this is the best way to go about it. I mean, the decision to launch OCW came out of it was frankly like a decade-long process as the internet was emerging, task force after task force, looking at questions of kind of MIT.com for-profit distance learning things. And each of those exercises came back with something that didn't quite like, no, let's let it shake out a little bit. Let's let it shake out. And the idea to launch OCW came out of yet another of those task forces where the recommendation was not, this is too much of a diversion from kind of the core sort of culture of MIT where our investment is going. And what's gone on with like the open source movement. What if we just get out of the way a little bit and give it away and see what happens? It wasn't clear what was going to happen. It really was not clear. And I think the impact that OCW has had and, the way that the open education ecosystem has evolved just has exceeded everyone's wildest expectations from those first few years. We could not be more thrilled.
Absolutely.
It sounds like something Tim would be proud of. Sarah, you're doing a lot of the work now. Like, what goes into making an OCW course? Because they're not just like all the same. Like when we look at the different materials, there's a mixture of modalities and types of materials that are provided. So what does it take to actually produce one start to finish?
Yeah, you're right. We have all different kinds of courses, and that's kind of the beauty of OCW. So we have a team and we have digital publication specialists, my colleagues, who develop relationships with faculty on campus, and they will recruit a course. They'll look at the materials. They'll actually work with intellectual property team to make sure that the items are cleared for a Creative Commons license, and they will do their best to get those materials in a format is remixable. If that's possible, we have a push to do more of that. They'll build it in our system, and eventually that course needs to be reviewed again by faculty before it's published. And often at that point, I will come in and ask if the faculty member would like to do an interview about their teaching. That interview will either be in the form of a survey, a podcast interview, or we used to do a lot of videos. Since the pandemic, we've moved more toward podcasts. And then eventually, after a lot of QAing for everybody on the team, looking at different aspects of the course, we sort of release it to the public. And it's so exciting, Alan. We have like regular meetings where we will showcase the course that has just published. And we're all so proud that this resource is now openly available to learners all around the world. And Curt, maybe you have some additional insights into the behind the scenes publication process that I might have left out.
I think that's a wonderful sort of overall arc of the process. Alan or Una, are there things about that you would have specific questions about?
What we find when working with colleges who are developing a lot of OER is that faculty who participate in these programs of developing OER for their courses, they improve their courses. And so I wonder, as you go through this kind of curation and ensuring that everything is open, are there improvements that occur during that time period with perhaps the faculty's teaching resources or practices?
We definitely hear that, faculty in the course of teaching a semester, there's a degree of chaos often, right? The syllabus shifts partway through. Certain things are done literally like the hour before the class happens. Many faculty have related to us that just pausing for a moment, the process of going through OCW publication is a really useful reflective practice exercise for them. And they're able to kind of look back, so this is the more coherent extraction from the learning management system than we would have gotten, raw there. And it's a great basis for ongoing teaching. And it also works because many subjects pass around from faculty to faculty over the years to have that, sort of version of record, if you will, that people are able to build upon.
I would just add to that. It was a great compliment to our process when the other day, one of our favorite OCW professors, Michel DeGrasse, he asked me for our interview that he did for an educator podcast, for our talk radio podcast, because he said he wanted to review it because he did a lot of reflecting during that interview. He was about to teach, that course again that he was talking about on our podcast. And he wanted to see what he said, how he reflected, so that it could actively shape what he was going to do next. And I felt like so honored to be able to create a space for very busy faculty members to do that kind of thinking.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear, Sarah.
Some of my favorite ones are where we actually, well, not actually, where we like their personalities emerge. Like we see these engaging people and they talk about experiments or they integrate, something that from everyday life. So it's not just all like, the material itself. Like, does that happen naturally with your faculty? Do you have to like work with them to kind of find the way they want to be represented in their courses?
You mean like
But
when we interviewed them about their instructor insights?
Like sometimes, when you see the course, there's of course the recorded lectures, but then there's like
Uh-huh.
the mini segments or the demonstrations or the things that kind of bring like a humanness to the teaching.
In general, when we're having those upfront conversations with faculty to invite their participation to get started in the process, we want to hear from them what their objectives are in sharing the class, an opportunity again to sort of reflect on the totality of the materials they've created and make sure that we're doing justice to what their objectives were. So we absolutely want to weave that into what we ultimately are producing and sharing.
Yeah. So when I interview them, I am so interested in who they are as people. And so I always ask those questions. How did this work? Where interests come from? What hurdles have you faced? So first we get to know them as people, and then we get into the research, and then we get into the teaching, because it all builds, right, on who they are as people. And actually, my whole goal in doing this is to help people outside of MIT feel like they're here with us under the dome, walking down the infinite corridor with their favorite professor for 15 minutes between classes. Like, I want them to have that same experience of magic that we get right here on campus. And that all starts with getting to know the people.
Yeah. And I think I would add to that authenticity is not just in the sort of, in the podcast, the educator insights offerings, but it's actually in the course materials themselves, right? We try to let that just sort of unfold as naturally as possible, and that's why OpenCourseWare materials don't have the feel of like a really polished kind of corporate education, slick sort of thing. You feel like you're at MIT, right? And our faculty they're so different in the way that they operate in the classroom. And we try to kind of showcase that as much as we can.
A lot of this conversation and the fact that Una and I work for this organization have a lot to say for what the impact of OCW was. But, we've seen over this span about how open education has broadened. And so while that's going on, like what is the role in 2023 for an open course or an open course for the world? I mean, obviously it's this great resource that you're giving, but like, where does it fit into the ecosystem of all open education? If that's not too broad or ridiculous question.
Not too broad, not too ridiculous. I think about it all the time. I mean, in one sense, the core mission of OCW is as it was 20 years ago. It's to like share the materials, the experience of the MIT education as best we can at scale across the curriculum with the world. What that means in practice and the lessons we're learning from it have continued to shift. I'll highlight, for instance, that there was an assumption that most of the users of OCW when this was launched would be other educators. Who's going to dump in and like work with like raw syllabi and problem sets from a advanced physics class. Well, mostly educators, maybe some graduate students. And the emergence of the curious, motivated, independent learner, how many people around the world are in that mode, has been one of those like wonderful surprises. The fact that OCW's kind of user community, fully half of them self-identify as just independent, curious learners. And the other half are, affiliated with an education institution and trying to span the needs across those quite distinct use cases used to be a worthy challenge. But we've seen that sort of growth of like these different use cases continue to evolve. I would say in the early days to do the curriculum sharing at scale, we did very little video. Video was very expensive. In the first few years of OCW, there was no YouTube, right? We did real media, real player.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Can you even play those anymore? Yeah.
OCW's presence on YouTube is by some measures more powerful and impactful on YouTube than it is on the website. We've got over almost 4.4 million subscribers on our YouTube channel. We think that's the largest subscriber base of any .edu out there. And that is the place where learners go to learn stuff. One of the most popular searches out there is, how do I fill in the blank? We know people are going there to learn stuff. And contrary to sort of popular perception that you got to keep your videos 5 minutes long and have all kinds of splashy stuff, we got people who are going through an 80-minute video lecture on an advanced subject and sticking with it. And that's a wonderful sort of development to see, especially I'd say in the last 3 to 5 years. That's really powerful. Another development, kind of attached to the growth of the independent learner has been what has become MOOCs and, credentialed learning outcomes from going through these open online experiences. Back in like 2009, 2010, before the blossoming of MOOCs, a year or two later, MIT OCW experimented with a program we called OCW Scholar, which is to produce complete start to finish linear sequenced representations of a handful of like foundational subjects, gen ed stuff in the STEM fields. And we did it. It was successful. And just like a lot of MOOC providers have discovered, wow, it takes a lot of resources to pull those off. And we were thrilled to be able to have that experiment done under our belt and hand it off to a program that is 100% about delivering those experiences. So it's been good to sometimes let go of things like that. With regard to where we are today, we've launched this new web platform, which is mobile responsive. So many people that we're trying to reach, the phone is their primary or only digital device. It's really important to be able to reach that, continue to be able to span the digital divide, and make sure that materials are accessible to even those who don't have reliable power, and to say, internet access as well. And the kind of reconnection, if you will, this flourishing of an education ecosystem. The work that folks around the OEG Global Consortium are doing is so exciting to us. And we are frankly in a mode of trying to catch up, reconnect with you all, and really, making some very intentional investments in that direction now. And thrilled to be doing that.
Also, in thinking about the role that OpenCourseWare can play in 2023, I think it can still play a role in situations of disrupted education, where people need to fill in gaps between formal education experiences. I think it can play an important role there. And I also think the importance of culturally relevant adaptations of OER are particularly important now. And so, we may share resources, but it's really the role of experts in various contexts to adapt them to meet the needs of their students. So I know we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that's really a lot of where our attention is going in learning from, the ecosystem, as Curt mentioned. We really have our ear open to hearing how those powerful things are happening.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I know that I've had conversations with Sarah and Curt about that desire to bring a more equitable lens, open materials, and certainly community colleges have been a leader in that area with their OER. It's representative of their students. And we're finding, of course, that that's quite effective when you're teaching with culturally responsive teaching resources. And so we're thrilled to know that that's a direction you're moving in too. And I think that, knowledge will go both ways this time.
Absolutely.
What's on the horizon what's the next step for OCW?
Curt, do you want to take it? I'm bursting here. I'm so excited.
I've been yakking for a while. I want to see if Chris wanted to jump in on that.
I get back to the previous question you had, Alan, and just to tackle a little bit again this question of what's the focus of OCW in 2023. I want to kind of just maybe amplify some of what Curt said and just say that the stakes in many ways have never been higher. For really, MIT has a special ability to put a stake in the ground for open and to be a voice and an advocate for all things open, right? Not just OpenCourseWare, right? But open access materials, open source, code, open platforms, open protocols, all of that. And there is both a need for it and a real energy around it that I think we can really tap into. And the need is in part responding to the fact that there are pressures against openness, right? Commercial forces, political forces, just burdens, financial burdens and other things on institutions of higher learning and K-12 education, both here and outside the United States. And also there's just an opportunity endorsing, sort of openness as a practice, right? The US government endorsing open science. All of these are really kind of important. And I think OpenCourseWare can be part of that conversation, but we can't do it alone.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Chris. We haven't talked about that, but sort of the changes over 20 years in terms of the Department of Ed and their endorsement and other federal institutions and their endorsements of open licensing of materials. Does anyone want to speak to that? I don't know how MIT was involved in the pandemic related research, but obviously the fact that it was openly licensed in the beginning, all of that research was just a real boon to getting the vaccines out widely globally. And if anyone wants to speak to that, as MIT, the Science Institute of one of our premier science institutes in the United States.
I think we all celebrate that very tangible and impactful demonstration of what open can do. Hey, I know it's a thing that's referenced, when we're talking about, the power of continuing to expand and grow our open capabilities. I'm thrilled to see, things like the recent US White House announcement about, just pushing, for stronger open access to research policies. MIT is absolutely in support of that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, 20 years ago, that would have been very controversial, right? So it's, it is wonderful to look back and see the changes.
Chris, I think you're making some really important points about the opportunities there.
I think that the opportunities are twofold, right? That first of all, we can see initiatives coming from things like the US federal government, like the United Nations, which has in many ways sought to tie its development goals to open knowledge production and dissemination. And, MIT as an institution can really be in the heart of the conversation. I think that we need to do it in conjunction with other institutions, right? So not, sort of doing it on behalf of, but, sort of in conjunction with universities that may not have, the same amount of resources, may not have a three-letter that's recognized around the world, right? And I think that, we need to kind of leverage this power at this particular moment to face some of the challenges we face ahead.
Yes, if I could pick up on something there too, that it's just related in some ways to the recognition of the things that open could do for culturally relevant pedagogy and community college, the recognition that we need the whole world to be able to contribute and access, not just to education, but also to the research enterprise. And, so opening open, to people who wouldn't historically have been able to access, to have their voices and their contributions get in there is, I think, an essential thing to be happening. I'm so glad to see things opening up that way. I think about, for instance, the Creative Commons and Colleagues Open Climate Campaign, really focused on, government policies and research and the necessity of bringing in community by community, the sort of on the ground expertise into that. It's not unlike what we're trying to do in open education with open pedagogy practices. So really kind of resonant to me in a powerful way.
Thank you for that, Curt. And, the open pedagogy is bringing your students in so they can share their lives and their lived experiences. That's an important part of what's going on socially. And we know that when students can see themselves in those materials, that they're more engaged. They're more likely to succeed in those courses.
I want to capture a thread here because I think Curt and Sarah were about to tell us something kind of new and exciting, maybe, when I asked about the next stage for OCW. I don't want to lose that because I felt the excitement rising in the room.
Yeah. Sarah, do you want to jump in on that?
So we are pretty excited to begin a next chapter, which is really focused on collaborations with other people in the open ecosystem. And that's going to begin with a lot of listening. We've brought a new colleague on board, Shira Siegel, whose job will be to listen to people in the open ecosystem, understand what their successes are, their challenges, their needs, and to work with us to understand that. And then to find points of connection where we can support the work of people in the ecosystem. We can shape what we do, when and if we can, in response to those needs. And we're just really excited about two ideas, and well, three. Oh my gosh, they like keep bubbling up. And so like one of them, Una, we're excited to begin working with community colleges to see if we can support faculty in teaching with resources from OCW, but more importantly, adapting them to make learning really powerful in their own settings. We're excited to work with a few HBCUs to generate conversations about culturally relevant teaching and to develop some shared understandings and some future visions for long-term collaboration. And I'm really excited that in April, faculty from Nigeria invited us to give a webinar on OCW. As part of that presentation, we'll have 2 case studies of faculty in Nigeria teaching with OCW resources. So I'm so excited to learn from them. So those are 3 examples of the kinds of ways we're trying to like come out from under the dome to re-enter the world and to really learn about what's going on and to get energized and inspired.
I could throw a couple other things out. What Sarah's describing is, to me, perhaps the most exciting thing that we're working on right now. A couple more sort of technological things that we have our eye on that we're intrigued by, excited by. One of them is the content discovery situation for people. The way that materials like this show up in search and repository, that the demands that places on like human curators and the challenges and limitations that puts on things. I feel like we're on the cusp of some really interesting things with some machine learning assistance on man. I don't know what form it's going to take. There's things that are rolling out, which I'm sure many of us are, following, for instance, the ChatGPT conversations and the way that information that one could get from trusted sources. We would like to think MIT goes into the places where people are looking for information. I think there's a lot of progress to be made there. I think 10 years from now, we'll look back at the way we did this stuff over the past couple of decades and like, wow, that was rough and clunky. I look for that to be much more human-centered and usable. Yeah, another sort of technology piece, if you will, collaborations and the focus on equity for learners is just continuing to pay attention to the digital divide aspects of reaching people. It is so easy for those of us who say live in the United States, totally take for granted in many communities. We got always on broadband and electricity is usually always on. We've held very important for OCW that our materials are in some a bit low tech, right? You download them, you can print them up. You don't rely on them being on a high technology server to have the experience. Really important work being done from like an instructional design perspective on learner experiences that do have these kind of like tech underpinnings. And the way that's going to play out for OCW, where accessibility is like a top priority, is really interesting to think about what that might look into. And again, I imagine being 10 years out and looking back on this time, like, wow, we've really made some big changes. I don't know what they'll be, but eager to see the kind of collaborations that might emerge.
Excited to hear about the collaboration.
It's exciting to hear about this new effort to be part of the ecosystem. And that's what we were hoping, that this conversation would be part of facilitating, instigated somewhat by Andrea Inamorato's visit to your center a few weeks ago. And so that's what got us rolling. And we certainly hope to keep on talking and figure out ways that OE Global can be part and plugged into what you're doing. And we also hope that MIT is going to be active during Open Education Week. I have to do a plug for that, March 6th to 10th, and we'll be asking you about that. But again, anything else like that you would like from a community to help you with? That's a very broad thing, but like, where are the ways, or what do you think about the ways that people can plug into your efforts?
Can I start by saying, in one sense, keep doing what you're doing. The inspiration that we're getting from all of these experiments and extensions and continuing to develop the sort of foundational ethos of open education is just so inspiring to us, and we are learning. And it's important for those things to be grounded, situated in the and the environments people are working in, and then just sharing that back with us. I just really look forward to continuing to see this continued.
See you all in Edmonton too in October. Come and share some of this great work and collaborations with the whole community.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
Indeed. And I would say another great point of overlap is the word global in OE Global, right? And that in addition to, tackling some of the challenges around sort of educational inequalities inside the United States, we're also really cognizant of ways that we can build community and engagement between the United States and our users all around the world. And so that's really important. And OE Global is, there are lots of people there that we're going to want to connect with and we'll want to be connecting in places like Edmonton.
We're excited to make that happen. Again, this is another episode of OEG Voices produced here at Open Education Global. And each episode, we feature a different musical intro track selected from the Free Music Archive, which is all Creative Commons licensed. And so since, thinking about today that we're here with a pioneering institution in open education, I found a track called Pioneer by an artist named Simon Mathewson, licensed Creative Commons by non-commercial share alike license. And you'll find this episode in a few weeks at our site, voices.oeglobal.org. And we hope that you'll engage in follow-up conversation with our OEG Connect community. And again, it's just so exciting to be here. I think we could go on for maybe hours, but we really appreciate your taking your time to talk to us and share what's going on at MIT. And this whole spirit of openness is so strong there and still is. And thank you for all you do there.
Thank you so much, Una and Alan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.